A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us for our 60-second presentation. Recently, I'd been researching some medical issues, and the magazine Lancet, which is a very respected peer-to-peer medical journal, is the one that I looked at. The journal name is most appropriate because the noun lancet denotes a surgical knife. How beautiful are these 18th century Persian surgical knives? Far from the bland ones one sees nowadays in the surgery, which are more reminiscent of these. But they do serve the purpose, and that's all that really matters. Knives are associated with health, not just healing. For knives play an important role for sustenance. Though I must admit, the one that I mainly use is this tomato slicer for just about everything, even sometimes when I'm lazy to butter bread. Knives are also there for utility and beauty. This gold tilted hilt depicting a tiger hunting a hare. This is from India, where each of the V's one sees on that shape has been manufactured separately and welded manually. It is a labor of love, and it's mainly a ceremonial sword. So this presentation views the impact of weapons in the sense effectively how this tool has thrust the story of humanity across thousands of years. This is one of the oldest knives found, and as one can see, the flint has ripple blades, which was designed to create maximum bleeding in the prey. Now viewed as a Mesopotamian piece of art, this finely executed elephant tusk ivory handle carvings include man as master of animals. One also sees lionesses attacking bulls, which is a recurring motif in Mesopotamia. And also, if you look carefully, there's a dog, like domestic dogs wearing collars. What interested me, honestly, when you look at this, is what knife or tool did they use to create and carve this piece of art? So, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, I'm going to trust they didn't just tear open their prey with their bare hands. So what was the proverbial kitchen knife used to make a meal of the beast that one sees drawn on these caves? And another interesting research point for me, what I unearthed was that one assumed previously that the majority of the handprints, one sees the handprints down here, one previously assumed automatically that those were men. And the research now shows those are mainly the handprints of women. So behold some of the early art by women. The Nourishment Project is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform this presentation. And since we started with prehistoric people and then we went on to the Egyptians, Greeks come next. But I didn't want to take a lazy route and start with swords or daggers that Odysseus or Hector or Achilles used, because there are tons of weapons in Greek mythology. Instead, I thought of someone I love who has a deep, deep interest in mythology. And I wanted to tell her, here, darling, at night, look up. Etched across the heavens, behold the mythology that you love. Because that's what the Greeks did, looking at the night sky with their naked eye. They attributed their stories, what we now call mythologies, to what they perceived in the stars. Things like Pegasus, Andromeda. Here depicted is Orion. And they had quite the imagination, because one really does need to be creative to view these shiny points of light. I mean, if you look at it, these are the points that you will see very soon. These points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Translate that into the night sky. These are the points again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is how they imagined their hero. I often wonder, how would you rename this if you saw these points in the sky? I don't think I would name it Orion. I certainly wouldn't name it Elon Musk. And if I squint hard enough, maybe it looks like an hourglass to me. I don't know, but that's a fun way of contextualizing these celestial beauties. Imagine a way, because to them, what's a hero without weapons? And in that star cluster, this is what they call, because this would be the Orion's belt. Here is Orion's sword that hangs from that famed belt. and the telescopic view of that sword itself. This is a star-studded sword, technically, and far in every sense from this glittering one is one that we are very much more familiar with, although it does glitter as well. The stars here are made of diamonds. Swords come in many other shapes as well. One also associated with Greek myth is the one here, the sword of Damocles, which implies as something dangerous, imminent danger hanging over your head. And I hope you get the sense of how ubiquitous knives and swords are in our lives. We use them in just about, like I said, ubiquitous everything, from cutting cakes. This is a novel way of cutting cake. We cut cakes when we celebrate life. I'm sure here there was, commemorating, maybe cutting of a new, opening up some health center. I don't know. You cut cake to celebrate life. And also knives come in to end death, not to end death, to end life itself. Death by scimitar in the story of Othello, or in many operas, you had Tosca. This could also be similar designs for Carmen. You have death by knives in opera all the time, quite dramatic. We also have it in paintings. Knives illustrate the point of death, doesn't it? Or swords in this case. Here is a painting of the Jewish heroine Judith beheading the tyrant Holofernes, and the sword plays a vital role. This painting is by the famous Italian artist Caravaggio. Don't you think it's ridiculous? I mean, just look at it. If you were going to decapitate someone, would you do it like this? There is her assistant, painted like goading her on. You go, girl, slice away. And Judith here seems more concerned not getting any blood droplets on her white outfit than anything else. Arms at a distance, as if she's slicing away some, unwanted fruit that she doesn't want to get her outfits dirty, like it's a pomegranate. Wouldn't his shrieks, because he is a warrior in the real story, wouldn't his shrieks wake up the whole camp? But we are constantly told this is a work of art, it's by Caravaggio, must be good. Perhaps not. Because for me, more to the point, would be the same story painted by this artist, Artemisia Gentileschi. The Judith here means business, very practical, because really, who wears white to a murder? Here she is in a very sensible dark color that can soak in the colors of the blood in case someone does see her. And this is probably a little dagger, which would have been much more inconspicuous to hang, and because she came into the enemy camp, and the assistant help holds him down, because that's what you would do. You can sense his restraint at being murdered, as one would naturally feel that. So to me, who's the superior artist? To me, it's this one, obviously. And she's of the same time frame as Caravaggio. And Gentileschi's own history is really, really fascinating. So we see swords and knives in painting. And as far as humanity and weapons go, many, many stories to entertain us. Zorro with his rapier, the Three Musketeers, swords, rapiers, daggers, tons of them, weapons galore. And this movie version, this was about a few years ago, was actually ridiculous. And the film almost fell on its own sword, so to speak. California's history of actor-politicians. Here's Schwarzenegger and his breakout role, I guess, in a movie, Conan the Barbarian. Conan's story pivots around the sword with which he finally exacts revenge. I think the sword was called Atlantean sword. Another famous sword, the Excalibur of the King Arthur legend. This is also a picture from a movie, and the movie was a doozy, except for, see if you can recognize her in her version here, Helen Mirren. To me, looking more Amazonian than English, but oh well. And in this scene, she's talking to Merlin the Wizard. And as I was researching for this, I found out, in the movie versions I had seen, Merlin the Wizard was spotlessly wonderful. But in the real story, he really wasn't. The backstory of Merlin is murky, perhaps not as saintly as one imagines him to be, or as he's portrayed. So Excalibur, the proverbial sword of kings, is really an amalgam. Nations seem to want epics, origin stories, and they do so by globbing together myths. So after the fall of the Romans in the first millennia CE being current era, out of that mist of about 600 years comes these Arthurian lores. And there are many, but today's focus is not that. But my most favorite reinterpretation of the Arthurian legend is Monty Python. You simply look at their outfits. I mean, even if you ignore the sword for a second, they just did a brilliant job doing this. So I'm going to point. Second from the left, look at this character's heraldic charge. It is a running chicken, not a rooster, like a chicken running away. Talk about a knight who's a scared chicken. It's brilliant. One can spend hours groaning with the details in this movie. I love it. And on the other hand, something with very little to laugh about, Lord of the Ring movies' famous sword, the Anduril, of the character Aragorn, one who would be king, played by Viggo Mortensen. And those aren't the only stories that we grew up with. Futuristic swords from 50 years ago, the lightsaber of the Star Wars series. And over the decades, these lightsabers are found in multiple colors. And most recent one is wielded by the heroine who kills the original hero's villainous nephew. So the arc of the story itself is very interesting. And she's not the only girl who's famous for wielding swords with aplomb. I laughed thoroughly watching the movie Kill Bill by Quentin Tarantino. Uma Thurman and a Hattori Hanzo katana. Katana is the Japanese sword. And incidentally, her sting like a bee yellow, black and yellow outfit was the director Quentin Tarantino's homage to an attire Bruce Lee had worn in the movie Game of Death. So this movie is obviously set in Japan. And from Japan, we move to China because Chinese movies are replete with martial arts and their fight sequences have the grace of ballet. In this movie, The Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the sword, the Green Destiny, was a central character. More movies with Chinese motifs of martial art. The character Mulan was a skilled sword fighter, and this movie's character is based on a Chinese legend, because I love finding these originals because they're really beautiful. You can see them in manuscripts, they can see the paintings in there, and the nuance and the subtlety of the story beyond just her being a sword fighter. That story is based gathering gems of beauty. The movie is based on that story. Other amazing fight sequences, and this movie had tons of butterfly swords. This Chinese movie, The Final Master. And in this movie, it's less about aggressive stabbing and slashing, and really more about the intelligent use of redirection, defense, and countering. It's almost, metaphors of life. How do you deal with the adversities of life? Not just constantly fight, waste energy dealing with it. One of my all-time favorite martial art movies, the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. So the martial art skills of Shaolin monks lead to an interesting point about weapons and religion. And since one sees Buddhist monks depicted in the background, let's start with the religion, Buddhism. In the center carving of this manuscript cover, so you have, this is a manuscript cover beneath which would be sometimes birch bark leaves. The manuscripts look very different. There are three what we call bodhisattvas, which is 1, 2, 3, starting with Manjushri in the middle, and Manjushri brandishes a sword that cuts through ignorance. So bodhisattvas are Buddhist enlightened beings who stick around to help others achieve nirvana. And there are three main ones. I'm going to go back to the previous one. You have Avalokiteshvara right there, Manjushri, and the one here is Vajrapani. So Manjushri, shown here, much easier to see, is the gentle friend of Buddhists who cuts through ignorance, helping bring insight into the true nature of reality. So it takes away what the Hindus call Maya, this veil that covers us. So it cuts through the ignorance in the Buddhist sense so that it brings you to the reality of existence, which they call shunnata, which is that this does not exist. This is all non-existence. Similarly, in tantric forms of Buddhism, they have weapons galore, and the weapons are used to fight ignorance. It's not weapons being used against other religion or other religious beliefs. It's really an inner battle fighting ignorance, to cut through the veil of ignorance. Buddhism, which formed from India, parts of India anyway, which is known for Hinduism. So Hinduism is a religion replete with many, many gods and goddesses. One shown here is the goddess Kali. And I'm biased, since the city of my birth, Kolkata, is closely associated with Kali, whom we see as a savior, as she brandishes her sacramental weapon, called in my vernacular Bangla, this weapon is called Khorgo. So Kali, goddess Kali, whom we call Kali Ma, we approach her as a mother protecting us. So Kali is a life-affirming deity, destroying all those who threaten the well-being of her worshippers and loved ones. She is also the consort of the god Shiva. And here she is shown depicting a garland with the decapitated heads of the demons. I just needed a reason to show this painting, because the painter here is one of my favorite Indian artists, Nain Sook. His work is sublime. Forever ready to vanquish evil and ignorance. Very similar stories here. Dakshineshwar temple is one of the most famous Kali temples in India, in Kolkata, because she is a regional goddess. She's everywhere, but she's mainly worshipped in the eastern part of India. I'm sticking with India because India is a secular, it's a democratic country, and there are many religions in there thriving, living as possibly peacefully with each other for the most part. India had Mughal rules. And here shown is Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal. The painting depicts he's out on a hunt with his son, Dara Shikoh. And I would like to call your attention to the flag that one sees up here, being zoomed in to focus on the pennant that depicts swords. So Mughal is, in the Indian ways, one way to describe Muslim leaders ruling of India. And these are not just any swords being depicted on the pennants. It's the very specific Islamic sword called Zulfikar. So the Zulfikar is one of 7, or depending on the story, 9 swords of the Prophet Muhammad. So Muhammad had come into the possession either by taking it from the conquered enemy at a battle of Badr, or he's said to have received it from the archangel Gabriel. So Prophet Muhammad had then reportedly given the sword to his son-in-law Ali. And the Zulfikar has a split blade like this, so it's very, very singular looking. And swords are very symbolic in Islamic religion and Islamic states. It's an essential part of their identity and celebrations, be it Saudi Arabia or Iran. So regardless whether you're Shia or Sunni Muslims, sword play a very important part in the Islamic iconography and iconology, because you can see the Zulfikar here again. There you see the split sword in this coat of arms of Pahlavi Iran. Again, continuing with other religions, in Christianity, similar to Islam, the religion was spread through bloody wars, the Christian wars known as the Crusades. And this 900-year-old sword from the Crusades was discovered 2 years ago in 2021, because apparently it had been uncovered by the waves and undercurrents that had shifted the sands. And it's said to have belonged to a knight, obviously covered with mollusks and nature now. I think it looks much more interesting. And speaking of knights and knighthood, the knighting ritual itself and the ceremonies continue to hold a lot of meaning to many people. Here is the crimson silk velvet padded seat for the ceremony of investiture. The recipient of the honor advances towards the stool, rests one knee on the stool and bows the head. The monarch touches the recipient briefly on each shoulder with a knighting sword. The one to ask, for example, would be Ringo Starr, because he's Sir Ringo Starr. He will let you know how it felt. So there are tons of weapons, obviously, We happen to be focusing on swords and knife to illustrate a point. And I hope the point becomes clear as the story continues. And army museums are best equipped to convey how much of our history is beautiful, albeit bloodthirsty. So case in point, cannons. This is from the time of Louis XIV. This utterly beautiful killing object is a piece of art, and it's telling a story. Stunning iconography, and with a rather sly sense of humor, because here the lion readies for victory by devouring a cannonball. I just thought it was just fascinating. Ottoman cannon, this one as an example, because not everything is gilded with gold. It's still beautiful because of the Islamic calligraphy on it. Daggers too can kill with beauty, and just because it's beautiful doesn't make death any less awful for the one who gets stabbed with this, although I'm sure this is a ceremonial dagger. Look again at the craftsmanship. It makes one wonder, why put all this exquisitiveness, like it's exquisite work, when delivering death? For beautiful as they are, these are deadly works of art. They're designed to kill. And that's true for armory as well. And yes, I understand this armor is more ceremonial than anything, but who knows? Maybe they wore something really beautiful if the king stepped out into war. So this armor is French. And this becomes then, as far as weapons are concerned, because there will be a lance with this, the whole 9 yards. This then becomes a story of art, of technology, because there are silversmiths needed to create all this, of geology. What are the metals being used? How do you mine the metals? It's a story about politics, because what are the wars being fought? Of branding, because when someone shows up like this, you stop and gape. Even if you're fighting, you're like, what is this? And many more details about branding. I'm just going to show you one little aspect, because I think that's why you come here, because life is so beguiling. Look at these. C and H, there's the H. It stands for Catherine de' Medici and Henry, her husband of France, Henri, I guess. This is from his time. This is his armor. And beauty in death is found across cultures. Japan shown here. Look at this ornate flower enameling on the armor there. It's exquisite metalwork across the board. Another one from Japan, Germany. And it almost looks like the Star Wars stormtroopers. But again, when you look at it, look and your curiosity is rewarded. I was stunned to see these tiny little hearts in there. And I thought, oh, quite ironic. What are you going to, is it telling you I'm going to stab you in the heart? Throughout history, it's a very complex story that even death, we bother to make it beautiful. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because across all cultures, one finds deadly objects painstakingly made utterly beautiful. Starting with, just for an example, the Yataghan sword. This is from India. It's an ivory hilt, watered steel blade with silver filigreed work made for the Emperor Aurangzeb, who is the son of Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan had built the Taj Mahal. Oddly and sadly, Aurangzeb had imprisoned his father, Shah Jahan, the guy who had built the Taj Mahal. And so that man had this one famed for his monument to his wife. He had died a prisoner. And we have seen this one earlier. Oh, look at the work on this. It's a hunting sword, and it's armed with whimsy and beauty. Why? Well, then again, why not? This one, it's a 150-year-old gold-hilted ceremonial sword, and it's embedded with ruby, emerald, and diamonds. This one also has a Latin inscription. If you look beyond the dazzling jewelry, because, if you're putting diamonds on here, you're going to bet it's not going to be used in battle. Because if I had a sword like this, I'd be very busy. Oh, all my diamonds falling off. But I guess if you have enough to waste on swords, you have more than enough gems to play with. What I want to show before we move on to other aspects of sword, this one is a one that's very interesting to me. This one is a rarity because it's chiseled with the 9 forms of the great Hindu goddess of war, Durga. The hilt right here has gold inlay work, but what interests me is the blade, which is watered in Javerdar steel, because if you look in closely, the sword bears the 9 incarnation of the goddess Durga, as identified by iconography with the names as described in the Hindu religious text, Durga Shaptashpati. So everything, this is made with blessings and made with devotion. And for me, while I was researching, swords fascinate with their diversity. I'm just going to give you samples because there are tons of them, the different types of swords. This is an example of a one-handed sword, which is the Egyptian khopesh. There are many other one-handed swords. I happened to pick one so we could hop through countries. Please don't forget, beautiful as they are, these are combat weapons. This is Tutankhamun's khopesh, and the shape of this khopesh sword is the same as the sword held by the figure of the king, depicted on the shield that was found in his tomb, considered mainly to be ceremonial. Here is the bronze khopesh of Ramesses II. So Ramesses is the name that will come to mind when you think of the poem Ozymandias, that statue on which the poem is based. Ramesses, I think it was still Ramesses II. Diversity of sword continues. Here is a curved two-handed sword, because swords can be very large, and when it's this large, you know it's being used to chop and hack, and mainly to hack people. So it's best to stay out of the way when the two-handed sword looks like this. And again, right with the ethos of curiosity, which is the Nourishment Project, knowledge is key to really appreciating something. So yes, one may admire the craftsmanship, the scabbard weaving, but it's a much richer experience when one recognizes that this split in this sheath, because it alerts you to the Islamic influence. The place that this sword is from is Philippines, but in this area, this island of Philippines that this is from, because it has many islands surrounding it, is predominantly a Muslim area. And so it might bring to mind, as well it should, the split shape of the Islamic Zulfikar. So I thought that was very interesting because the more we know, the more one gets aware of the connections across geography. Thereby, this art object connects to politics, to religion, and history. Because again, without true learning, real luxury is inaccessible. As a very low-hanging fruit, the design of this will increase the value of the object for the collector because it's designed like the Zulfikar. Education matters on every level because it doesn't say so on the write-up, does it? But if you were collecting and you knew that aspect, you would know this one, even though it looks smaller and less maybe daunting than the other ones, this is one worth collecting. Diversity of weapons just on one tiny island by the Philippines. So imagine this multiplied across the world. The machete-like designs. And if you move on, diversity of a hand and a half sword. So this brings us now to the northwest of India, areas of Assam, and the weapon is called Dao. The story, I chose this specifically because it's going to become even more subtle. Research reveals that there is a huge significance that cowrie shells are being used to decorate this, because then it denotes ownership by a warrior. And not just any warrior, often these warriors in this part of India are head hunters. So one reason for sharing the story about these people, the other Naga, the part of Assam that we're talking about are the Naga people, I want to share a little bit of their story because this culture is gone. Most of them had been converted to Christianity, and I really mourn the loss of cultures. Not just the Naga people, many cultures are lost, not just because of modernity. In our history, we've lost tons of cultures. And this is my way of honoring our rich global history, our humanity. And weapons reveal a lot about us. So, for example, I found it very interesting, and I wanted to share with you that the Daos, weapon as they are, they were parts of funerals. And also, they were parts of everyday life. What is the lived experience of this weapon? They would be used to make a path through the jungle because they live in the hill forest area. Because the lived experience of the object matters to me. They were part of rituals. The material of the blade itself signified the status and wealth of the owner, because not everybody could afford a steel or a metal blade. The cowrie shell patterns depict, depending on where they're from, what the patterns are, they depict the many different ethnic tribes across these hills of northwest India, the Assam area. The circular motif denoted a face in the cosmic schematization. So it had a connection to the moon. And Shoma means the moon, so I was kind of biased towards that. But I like to think I'm a bit more than that shallow. The colors of the ornamentation for these blades mattered because why? How did they get the color? Dyes matter in all of life. Some of the dyes for these were made with orchids. So if you love flowers, those areas in Northwest India, all the Himalayan regions have phenomenal flower culture. The botany there is superb. Imagine the kind of orchids that grow there that we may not even know of. So these people use natural dyes. And what did they use for the dye? You can get lost in the details, in wonder, in so many ways. I really deeply lament any modernization that condescends tribals as backwards. They're anything but that. We have a lot to learn from their respect for balancing the forces of nature. And I'm just getting warmed up. I was gobsmacked by the sword culture of Africa, a continent with 54 countries. Ghana is being shown here. And the culture from this area is historically known as Ashanti, the history and the people. And they have a very intricate, evolved sword culture. One example of this intricacy is this idea of a courier sword. So swords would go on errands and silently announce grave matters, including death in the royal lineage, or perhaps to declare war on an enemy state. Swords also acted as a witness while an emissary delivered a message. So here is shown a replica. And this is obviously an axe, not a sword, but I wanted to show it to you because it was the clearest picture I could find. But you can apply it to swords being covered with leopard skin also. So the original axe is in the British Museum, and the axe was created to inform the Queen Victoria that the British were welcomed in peace as long as they did not interfere in the internal affairs of the Ashanti men. So this is in the 19th century. For all intent and purpose, this is called an akuma, which is a Twi word for axe. This akuma has a double meaning. So what is it saying? Because again, lived experience of the weapon. Symbolically, that axe can cut through any problem that is metaphorically represented by a knot. You can cut through the problem like a Gordon's knot. The leopard skin cover is to say that we are all humans, not animals. And as such, we are not to prey, but to live peacefully with each other. And on the flip side, if diplomacy fails, the axe will hack potential adversaries to pieces. This is just one weapon. Africa is much, much, much more than safari, and African art is much more than masks. Africa, the continent, deserves her own presentations. I cannot do it justice in this. I just wanted to alert you that if you spend time discovering the beauties of Africa, it is certainly worth your attention. You will not be sorry. Moving from Africa, the legendary sword culture in Japan. One of the most famous ones, the priest Masamune, he was from the 13th, 14th century, was a blacksmith and is widely acclaimed as Japan's greatest swordsmith. So the swords of Masamune possess a reputation, because you can still see some of them now, for superior beauty and a quality that is remarkable. And it's remarkable for many reasons. One pertinent reason being that they were built in a period where the steel that was necessary for creating this sword was generally often impure. But what he managed to create has survived over the ages, and the beauty of them is staggering. Masamune is considered to have brought to perfection the art of embedding martensitic crystals in a pearlite matrix so that those crystals resemble stars in the night sky in the weapon. And how can you not just gasp at the vision of these artists? Masamune's swords are Japanese national treasures. And sadly, after Japan surrendered in World War II, the Allied forces had demanded the noble families of Japan turn over their swords. Some nobles resisted, but one named Iyamasa had willingly handed over 14 of his familiar, these treasure swords, including one that was called the Honjo Masamune. To this date, no one knows where that Honjo Masamune is, because the American who reportedly had collected the swords did not exist in real life, existed only in paper. So it was a fake name, and no one knows where these swords are, all 14 of them, let alone these Honjo Masamune. Undoubtedly, it'll turn up one day at a phenomenal price. Missing treasures always do, rest assured. So Japanese sword culture is welded to royalty and religion. As we said before, religion has deep, deep bonding with weapons. Take the tsuba, which is the Japanese term for sword guards, and it's there to prevent the opponent's belt from slipping on the saber and cutting off the hand. Artistic variations of tsubas are infinite. They can be rectangular, they could be round, they could come in the shape of a chrysanthemums. Because of my bias towards snakes, I'm showing the one of the snake on the right. And these designs are also period dependent, depending on which royalty was in power. So the chiseled designs exuded the explicit expression that the warrior needed to feel during or outside a duel, because these weapons meant they were a huge part of their identity. I want to show you how clever things can be. How charming is it that the tsuba depicted on a medicine container? Symbolically, this is guarding health. Isn't that awesome? So clever. I just wanted to show you. It's nice to do. And again, another cheat for me, because I often want to show you these things that I just get beguiled by, but I have to find a reason to do so. I have always wanted to share with you this calligraphy. It's one of my favorites. You can see it online. It's in Harvard University, so you can see it in the Harvard Online in the art collection. It's called Battle Between the Chickens and the Rats. And look, they're all carrying katanas. The humor and the skill in this artwork, it's outstanding. And they all have their daggers and swords. Just look this up. I just wanted to have a reason to show it to you. So back to the real crux of the story, the thrust of the story. Swordsmithing in Japan had existed as early as 1000 BCE, BCE being before current era. So the forging of the Japanese blade was itself considered a sacred art. The blade was considered the warrior's most endearing possession. It is essentially the soul of the samurai, which is the Japanese warrior. Japanese swords had been produced by raw material, such as sand, iron, coal, and other natural extracts from the ground. And because the Japanese religion before Buddhism was all about, it was animistic, they worshipped nature. Swords, when they were built, there was a custom that existed that they dedicated the newly made swords to the shrines. And one example of where they brought these swords, one of the most famous ones, is the Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya. The artistic symbolism of swords is sublime, and I'm going to go over two of them, and then hopefully it'll pique your interest. You can look even more. So for example, this one, the sword's mounting features a scabbard lacquered to resemble a tree bark because it's decorated with maple leaves, and it has an ornament in the shape of a cicada. I hope you can see all this. A snail forms the cord knob. because there will be cords attached to this. And to my deep delight, a snake as the hilt ornament. And this hilt ornament, and look at the centipede there, it's all nature, what you would find around trees. And this snake ornament is likely refers to a very popular East Asian hand game that has been introduced to the West as rock, paper, scissors. Isn't that fun? I just need to find reasons to share these with you. So the Japanese have always regarded the Japanese sword as a medium of functional beauty. It is said to be the iron of art. So look at this one. Covering the scabbard is a type of ray skin whose nodules resemble plum blossoms. You know, cherry blossom, plum trees. These are all trees that are loved by the Japanese for their beauty. This one has been lacquered black and then polished to reveal parts of its texture to make it look, remember it's a ray skin, to make it look like a plum blossom. Again, I worship the mind that envisions this level of sublime beauty. How could one not? And so from the 19th century, Japanese swordsmith has taken this opportunity to concentrate on artistry because they don't use it to fight so much. And so the blade cutters test the cutting efficiency, knowing full well it's probably not going to be used for fighting. So from 19th, 20th century onwards, I want you to know, how do they test these and make sure that they're working right, even though most of them knows it's not going to be used for battle. So the swords were tested on corpses that were often tied together, almost 7 up to a body, to increase the resistance to the cut. So they test these swords on corpses tied together. Can it cut through? And they did. So again, even though they're no longer designed for battle, these blades, ornamental as they may be, were able to cut through 7 bodies bundled together, to cut through that in a single blow. And not just that, because it's not just the functional beauty. Look how you have to handle these. The process of unsheathing a sword becomes easier gradually, but it is only half the battle, because putting it back into the scabbard has its own intricacies, because a slight wriggle could scratch the delicate cutting edge. Because despite that it's intended to cut through armor, these things are very, very delicate. It's a fragile, strong beauty. Isn't that something? The dichotomy of these things. So the Japanese imperial family owns many swords. The Tsubokiri sword is the most important sword owned by the crown prince. He's not the crown prince anymore. It was given to him by the emperor as proof of the official crown prince after his inauguration. And not just, royalty, swords sometimes express beauty through dance. This one, as one can see from his dandy legs and his kilt, this is in Scotland. And we had previously shown the sword dances in Saudi Arabia. But you also have sword dances in other places like South Korea, because the traditional sword dance there is called Jeomu. Keep in mind, there are sword dances in India, there are sword dances in China, in many places around the world. This is just showing samples. We're just hopscotching over the planet. The Korean dancers and this dance places special emphasis of the movement of the costumes, notably the sleeves. They have to be in harmony with the dance movements. And so the sword dance has been awarded the distinction as Intangible Cultural Treasure number 12 by the Republic of Korea. So the way to really, again, lived experience, to imagine this. Think on that you're above the city in a temple like this. There are 3 rings akin to the Suba, the sword guards, called Kukhwa. Kukhwa, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it's in a position between the blade and the handle, and they come in varying sizes. You see the different sizes here? So as they are being swooshed through the air, the melody of these rings, as they whirl with grace, it's music. So imagine that artistry. There's music, there's color, the beauty of the sword itself. But wait, see this at night. underneath the starry sky with these lanterns and surround this atmosphere with the Korean flowering tree Evodia. It has a perfume. This takes weaponry to a totally different level. Sword dances that just elevate, it just cuts right through you. It is so beautiful. But there are swords and beauties throughout Europe as well. But I figured we were much more familiar with them. So I didn't want to focus on it. And the attires one wore with these rapiers mattered as well. So because swords were at some point, and they still remain, ceremonial, and it's a fashion statement. Fashionable swords, they were made with beauty in mind because it's a show-off piece. You want to wear something like this in real life. You won't have a dusty old sword with you. And there's also the art of fencing. I mean, the narrative is inexhaustible because in reality, the story about swords and knife could be a story about the sport of swords. One has a sword whip, each one 7 blades of a sword. Imagine being whipped with this. It will cut you, shred you to bits. There could also be the story of the sword, could be the history of sword and women. There's a huge history of swords with women in India, in England, in South America. It's inexhaustible. And it's time that limits us. So in truth, what stands out for me in this story about weapons? Well, filtering the weapon category to just knives and swords. I hope I was able to successfully demonstrate the role that these tools, be it a knife or a sword or a dagger, have played in carving out history, our own history, from skinning and cutting the meat for our hunter-gatherer heritage, to the sickle used for agriculture, because this is all part of the growth of humanity. This is how we've come to our Anthropocene age, to our history of nation expanding through warfare using swords, the tools needed to create art, because you use daggers and knives to chisel and create beauty and art. It has shaped the human. But my question, what goaded me on was, what about life in general? How did swords and knives and weapons play in our life? So if you take the larger view, it is simply undeniable. Humans are a physically weak species. We have neither the claws, nor the fangs, nor the strength to fight pretty much any of nature's creatures of power. And there are many. Try standing face to face with this, it'll swat you away. But yet, in self-importance and arrogance, some say we are the most intelligent of God's or nature's designs and of evolution, that we're the pinnacle of evolution. Oh, really? Let's take the real view. A tiger's natural weapon, among other things, is its claws. And it has evolved over time in alliance with the tiger's nature. Because the claw of a tiger, what it uses to cut, is what effectively is our pocket knife. What we didn't have in claws, we get through a pocket knife. But keep in mind now, this tiger does not kill for sport. It does not unsheath its claws just for the fun of it. It uses its weapons, its claws and strength and power and fangs to survive only. I have yet to hear of a tiger go on a rampage, simple for the thrill, and just kill rampantly. It does not do that. The tiger's nature is bereft of any such insecurities. Yet we, though we have evolved from weapons such as this flint sword to sophisticated weapons like this saber-like laser from satellites, I mean, it's our celestial vision of defense. And this is not science fiction, this is real. Our human nature has not evolved with the sophistication of the weapons we have intellectually been able to design. It is against our nature. We don't have the reality, our natural, we have not evolved like the animals that have natural weapons. Perhaps we shouldn't have these. Our arrogance has weaponized our intelligence. And that really thrusts the real narrative of this story. the spiritual story of the beast and the beauty. I want to take a moment to share with you the picture of how the Nourishment Project works, because some of you had asked about this. So there are two aspects to the Nourishment Project, because if you like stories like this, you're automatically supporting the main thrust of what we do, which is promoting lifelong learning. So the Nourishment Projects, the copywritten version, is a production house. We produce presentations and operas, presentations like this. And anything from here feeds into the work that we do as an educational not-for-profit, which is known as the Nourishment Project's NFP. So the NFP stands for not-for-profit. And we put all our endeavor, we volunteer our services into promoting education. It's intergenerational learning. So just earlier this week, on April 17th, we had a class with elementary school children. We have lots of highly respected collaborators here from what was known as the Oriental Institute, talking to second graders about Islamic astronomy and how it's been influenced by Greek astronomy and the separation, some of the interesting separations. For example, even though the Greeks knew about the Andromeda galaxy, they did not see the Andromeda constellation in that galaxy, but the Islamic ones saw it. And that's for second graders. So it really increases the interest to pay attention to the natural world, look up and see what's out there. For high school students, we also work with middle school students, but I'm just giving you a synopsis. For high school students now, this semester, what they're working on at the school called GCE Lab, they're working on designing sustainable refugee camps in 2 refugee camp areas, Zatari in Jordan and one in Bangladesh, Kutupalong. And another school at Curie High School, we have an ongoing presentation, which is a workshop. It goes over months. It's called Endeavor. It's about opera, and we love opera. And they're helping understand opera and design opera and talking about opera, because opera is such a marvelous tool of promoting empathy, creativity, perspective. It's really a pleasure and a privilege for us to be able to do it. And the reason I'm sharing this with you, because every bit of your membership money goes into these programs. So please know, when you're spending your time watching this program, and I'm grateful for your time, you are promoting education. And I hope you're very proud of that, because we're very proud of the work that these children do. So thank you for your time. The NFP is something that I wanted you to know about, because you help make it happen. And next month's presentation is on something that we all love, and they can be objects of beauty. The topic is shoes. I hope you join us. I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you again for your time, and I wish you joy.